Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Monticello live stream. I am Melanie Holland, and today we're going to be talking about gardening ahead of our open house at our Monticello Center for Historic Plants at Tufton. We have an open house and plant sale coming up on May 27th. So you got a little bit of time from 9 to 2. And at the open house, you can tour the nursery, buy plants, and also hear from featured plant experts and speakers, such as the two people who are joining me today for the live stream. I have Ashlie Thomas, and she is a author, a gardener, a advocacy for hold on, let me get back to food security and home gardening. And she's also an author. She'll talk a little bit more about her book. And we'll be talking about small space gardening. We're also joined by Anna Lobianco-Sims, and she is the vegetable gardener at Tufton. And so the two of them are going to talk a little bit about small space gardening and some other issues. So I will hand it over to them and they can take off.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. All right, Ashlie, let's get right into it, I guess. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience a little bit? Just how did you become a gardener? What are your primary goals, maybe within your own garden? Just to touch on that.
Yeah, sure thing. So are you ready to talk for like ever and ever? Because that is a loaded subject.
Always.
Yes, good day, everyone. Whether you are from the East Coast, which is afternoon now, or somewhere else, good morning to you. My name is Ashlie Thomas, and I am a gardener, simply put. I value not just growing food, but really the health and wellness of people. People in my family, my community, and really it's just like all around the world. I do a lot of advocacy work in food security, and that is simply just ensuring that people, all people, have access to safe and nutritious food. So I want that for everyone because it is directly tied and correlated to our health. And I have been gardening for a while now, but officially I've been gardening from my home that I share with my husband here in North Carolina since 2019. We built our garden. I like to call it like a homestead, but we built our garden from scratch. It was a dense forest area, and we knew that we wanted to grow foods and really just provide greater access to nutritious foods for ourselves and for our family. And now it has branched out into helping to, teach and empower people to grow nutritious foods for themselves with using whatever space they have. We are not using the entire acre that we have here on our property, but just a small portion of it, and we produce so much food. So I'm excited to talk about this because I'm very passionate about the subject. And more importantly, I want to see other people growing delicious foods that they need to thrive. So thank you, Anna.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, it sounds like you are in a similar situation that maybe a lot of people are finding themselves, at least a few years ago. They have a small space in their yard and they're trying to figure out ways to produce and to feed their family and feed themselves. So I think this could be really useful for a lot of people. Our setups are probably a little different. I'm working in maybe a slightly more traditional farm setting. It's about an acre just dedicated to crops. But there's a lot of crossover with different challenges that we might face and solutions to that and the things we're growing. So I think we'll both be able to provide some common ground that everybody will be able to use for sure. So given that you're working out of a relatively compact space that, a lot of people might find themselves in, can you tell us a little bit about small scale gardening and what that looks for you and how that might translate to somebody else who has a plot?
Yeah. So small scale is really anything under an acre, in my opinion, and how you are actually growing. So I think sometimes we think when we think about the term or this concept of small space gardening, we're thinking balconies or sunrooms, and all of those things are size limited spaces. Yes, but you know, for the types of things that we're growing, we don't have a lot of space, or we're not trying to, you know, expand beyond the space that we have. And now over time, I will say that we've kind of branched out a bit more because that's what gardeners do. We just call and want more space. But we are utilizing things like raised beds, containers. We actually just branched into in-ground gardening, but it's not using a lot of space. And so there are ways to efficiently grow in size limited spaces, and to grow effectively so that you can really harvest an abundance of food. And that has been our focus in our garden. So where we started off with, you know, just a few, I'm not going to say just a few, because I think that we started off with quite a bit, which is about 9 raised beds. And then we kind of expanded that to a greenhouse, and then a she shed, and then the in-ground, and then containers. I told you, I'm a gardener. That's what we do. We want more.
Yes.
But then we also have our chicken coop as well. So this is all within a very, you know, compact space, and we're growing all year round. So there's a lot that you can do if you know how to optimize your space.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I think raised beds are highly appealing to a lot of people nowadays, especially if they're just looking for maybe 1 or 2 small areas to grow, maybe a handful of tomatoes, a handful of cucumbers, whatever that might be. So with that in mind, what are some good starter plants for people who are saying, like, maybe I only have a couple of beds, 1 or 2 that I'm looking to maximize? What plants would be most well suited for a space like that?
Well, so it depends on what your space is. So, you know, if you are growing in something like us, which is under an acre, not even like, I think we're not even going on a third or a quarter of an acre, you can grow things like the tomatoes, determinate and indeterminate. I will say that the indeterminate varieties, you're going to need to definitely support those things.
Yes.
So vertically growing is going to be kind of something that you want to consider in small spaces. A lot of times we think about horizontal and we're like, oh my God, I don't have enough linear space, but vertical is a great way to maximize space. So we've got the tomatoes, you've got cucumbers, the same way, the same thing, eggplants. We've got carrots, which, you know, you can do a lot with a 12-inch depth raised bed, or even pots and containers. We've also got peppers. So I think I named about 5. If I did it, if I only named 4, let me give you another one.
Sure.
Leafy green. Leafy greens like collards and the lettuces. You can all grow these in small spaces. So Anna, I do have a question for you. We talked about a lot about my space, but are you utilizing raised beds and containers and on like the acre size garden?
No, actually, all of our plants, save maybe 1, is in-ground gardening. And that's only because, you know, I'm producing at a relatively large scale, and we utilize a lot of equipment. I really try to maintain a no-till structure. So I'm not necessarily tearing things up, but, you know, mowers and seeders and compost distributors, things along those lines. So in a raised bed situation, that's not really conducive to the types of equipment that I use. But that being said, I still hear a lot of your struggles with with vertical growing. Even though I have quite a bit of space, I still feel like at times I'm running out of space. I'm like, again, what you said, I always want to put more, so I often have to consider what kind of like garden infrastructure I'm going to be using and put that up ahead of time. And I like to opt for a more sturdy structure system, whatever that might look like, just because I know by the end of the year, when maybe that winter squash vine is really heavy with fruit. I don't want a really flimsy netting that's going to be really weighted down. So just like troubleshooting those ahead of time, I find to be really helpful. And also it's easier to pick if you have something that's up and you can see it and you can check for pests, you can maneuver around it a little bit more. It just makes for an easier life as a gardener for sure. So that's, very good.
I agree with you. And, one interesting thing that we did in our space was I like to call it making lemonade out of lemons. We've got bamboo in that dense forested area in our yard, and we needed trellis. So we know that the cost of wood has increased, over the past couple of years. And we were thinking, why source wood from the hardware store? But we've got something right here in the back of our yard. So we use bamboo. Chopped down bamboo in our yard and basically built a trellis for our tomatoes, and this is the infrastructure and the support that you can kind of incorporate in the garden. And we just did so using what we had in our yard.
Yeah, waste not, want not. That's for sure.
There you go.
Awesome. Yeah. In terms of tomatoes, we one of our primary crops, probably the primary crop, is tomatoes. So we really have to hone down an effective way to get them up, secure. I think all of what we're growing are the indeterminate varieties. So they're just going to keep on going and going basically to the end of the season. And I find that laying stakes along the ground, and then we like to utilize twine to just kind of follow them up all the way as they're growing. So, and I think that, and honestly, you can pack quite a few tomatoes together using that method, because there's really not a lot of space on the ground that you're keeping them away from. So,
yeah, I love the twine idea. It's great. And I think, it blends in with the aesthetic of a garden. And at the same time, it's very sturdy.
Yes.
We actually use a lot of twine in our garden as well. So
you can reuse those stakes year to year, the twine even to an extent.
Yeah, to an extent.
Very nice. So on that note, what are some challenges that you most encounter in your small space, whether that's pest pressure or weed pressure or whatever that might be?
Yeah, I saw you kind of smirk when you talked about this.
I know how it is.
Because it's where do we start? Let's take out some coffee and tea and talk about this. There's so many challenges. And I think when you are playing and doing things out in nature, it's a whole world, literally. There are the microorganisms, and then there are the macro, the larger ones that, and sometimes we think, it's just the rabbits and the deer, which are very, they can be an issue for many gardeners. However, you've also got the micro things like the fungi, molds, and some of the good and bad bacteria, as they say. I would say, a common challenge that we face here in North Carolina, Zone 7B, we've got high humidity and the warmer months. We also have some insane heat. When it gets hot, it gets very hot. That sun is just beaming down. So the challenge with the humidity is powdery mildew. And that is basically kind of this this mildew that forms on the foliage of leaves, really are squash, cucumbers, things of that nature. And it is aggravating. It will basically stifle the growth of your plant and really disrupt the health. It affects the flowering. It affects its ability to really just bloom and blossom and thrive. So we have been addressing that with things like BT, grapefruit extract, diluted, and really just making sure that we allow sun ventilation and a lot of, that we're not watering the foliage, but more so focusing on the soil and the roots of the plants. That is helping. It doesn't keep us from, stopping growing these plants. I would also say, in the same token, our squash takes a beating, because if it's not powdery mildew, it's going to be the vine borers. Squash vine borers, which is a wasp that lays its larvae inside of the stem of the plants. And I mean, what can you do? We do our best.
Of my existence.
I think it's the bane of everyone's existence here in the Southeast.
Yeah.
So we do our best to really just kind of watch for any signs of infection or the wasp. We know exactly what that wasp looks like, so we're being mindful of making sure that we can cover the stem of the squash and cucumber and melon plants as best as we can. But I mean, you just plant ahead of time, try to feed them to it, and it's just kind of the nature of gardening. But I welcome, if you have a solution, I welcome to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely had a lot of trouble with them last year. They wrecked our zucchini and squash plants specifically. So this year I'm trialing. Again, it's all about trial and error. Just if something doesn't work last year, it'll hopefully work this year as you troubleshoot. So a little bit of a I guess nerdy tidbit. The squash borers, they will go after every species of the squash plant, the cucurbita, except for the Moscato species, which covers a lot of winter squashes, like our butternut squashes, or our Long Island cheese pumpkin is one that some people know. So I kind of took that, because our butternuts did amazing last year, which is, also a type of squash. So I did some research into Moscata species that are, maybe produce more of a summer squash type plant. And I did find one. I think Baker Creek had one that was like, if you pick it young, it functions like a zucchini. You can cook it like a zucchini. And in theory, they shouldn't bother it. So I guess we'll see. But other than that, I also like to place those plants that maybe need a little bit more attention a little closer to like the barn that I'm working out of directly. Just if I have more eyes on it more often, if I'm passing by a little bit more frequently, I can kind of train myself to just always check that stem, look at that plant, see if there's something wrong with it, see if I need to address it, versus the lower maintenance plants that I might not need to water as often or don't have that kind of pest pressure. I can put them really far away, because if I check them once a week, they're probably going to be good, as opposed to maybe every day.
And, I was actually sitting here writing down the cultivars that you were talking about.
Yeah.
You mentioned Moscata, and what was the other one?
I think it's just the Moscata that they don't. But there's several there's a lot of varieties actually that fall under that. I'm using it's Zucchino. I don't know how to say the last part, but I think if you Google Moscata Zucchino, it should come up. And they get if you leave it, it will turn into a winter squash. But if you pick it young while it's still green, you can cook it just like a zucchini.
I love it. I love that. Okay. All right. I see that you learn something new every day.
For sure.
But I will say that to anyone that's listening, a lot of times you don't realize that your squash or cucumber or melon plant has been infected, and you're fertilizing it to the death, and you're watering it to the death, and you're like, why is it wilting? One telltale sign is, I think it's what is it called? It's called the sawdust. Oh gosh, the word slipped my mind. It's the sawdust. Basically, it's from the wasp drilling into the stem of the plant.
Yeah.
And you'll see like sawdust type of substance towards the base of the plant. And you might see a hole. You'll most likely see a hole where something has penetrated the stem. That is a telltale sign. And then your leaves will be wilting, and it's probably because there's larvae inside.
And unfortunately, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's really anything you can do past that point that they've drilled. So if you just want to tear that plant out and just kind of stay on top of it so more don't hatch, that's probably going to be best practice.
Agreed. maybe we should talk about something lighthearted.
I completely agree. So what would you say is like the your favorite plant maybe that you grow, like your number one plant that you would recommend to everybody?
I can't choose one. I'm going to cheat and say two. Okay.
Of course.
You ready? Okay.
Uh-huh.
I think it's going to be collards. I love collard greens, and I love okra. I love okra. And to me, these plants are not just deeply symbolic culturally for me, but it's also just really delicious. And it's like a deeply southern dish.
Yes.
Depending on how you prepare it. So with the collard greens, I've been we grow these, every year. It's something that my family enjoys. Those around my community, we enjoy it. And I like to can them so that I can have them all throughout the year. And okra. Different types. We've got, I think it's a jink orange. So it's kind of orangish hue. And then we've got a burgundy variety of okra. And then, of course, the green Clemson spineless okra as well. I will say I'm very excited about an experimental pack of seeds that I will be trying this year. It's called the Ultra Cross okra, and basically completely experimental. Okay. There is a chance that over 85 varieties have been were grown together. So there's some crossing that took place as they were, producing. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to get. And the reason why this is important is because there's a lot of genetic variation when you do that type of crossing. It's not to say that you won't get maybe crossing between 3 or 2 varieties, but it's just the possibility. And so I think for me, having this pack by, I think it's called the Experimental Seed, the Experimental Farmers Network is the name of the organization. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
I think it's bringing out kind of this nerdy side of me of just the wonder and the curiosity of what will happen. Typically, what are we going to see? So that's what I'm excited to have in our garden this year.
Yeah. So I have to ask, I feel like okra is one of those things that can be kind of divisive. Some people absolutely hate it. They can't stand it. And to that, I say you probably just haven't had it prepared correctly. So how do you prepare okra? What's your favorite method?
So I'm gonna address this because I get a lot of people that don't like the slime of okra. And to me, that is a staple. Like it's a staple in like gumbos and things of that nature that my family makes very often. So for those who do not like the slime, I highly recommend you eating them just fresh off the vine. It's crispy, it's slightly sweet, and you won't get that slime effect the way you would once the okra is cooked. Also dehydrating them. Nice, crispy, crunchy, just wonderful. And of course, there's no slime at all. So yeah, I just gave you 3 ways. In a soup form, sauteed, what is it? Fresh off the vine, and then of course dehydrated.
Yeah. And I would recommend people always make sure to pick your okra when they're small, when they're young, because they tend to get tough and woody pretty quickly. My preferred way is pickling. I would kill for a pickled okra. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, that's definitely something that we grow as well, and it's a favorite. I'm not a fan of picking it. I will not lie. The plants can be a little hostile at times. It's definitely an underrated crop for sure.
I will also throw out a little secret. No, it's not a secret at all, but you can actually eat the leaves. You can eat the leaves just like you would, say, kale or collards or something, and they're delicious. So picking them nice and tender, not when they get gigantic, they become a bit more fibrous, just like the fruit. But or just like the pod, but if you pick them tender, they're delicious.
Very cool. We like to eat all of our plant if possible. Maybe don't pick all of the leaves off of it, leave a couple so it can fruit.
There you go.
Very cool. Very cool. You learned something new. Yeah, I'm a big fan of crops with a long storage life. If I'm going to be picking, especially a really large variety of something or a really large quantity of something, I like to be able to store it and trust that it will keep in the fridge for, maybe even months at a time. So winter squashes and pumpkins are a favorite of mine. I love the variety, and it can be so rewarding, especially with something that has such a long growing season, 100 plus days. That anticipation builds and builds, and then finally you have this beautiful ripe pumpkin.
Yeah.
And hopefully at the end of the season, that you can cure and store in a cool place for, months to come. That'll kind of hopefully get you through the winter.
So very quickly, you mentioned squash and pumpkin as being kind of these having a longer shelf life. But what are maybe 2 or 3 other vegetables or whatever that maybe have the same kind of longer shelf life?
Yeah. I would say any root vegetables tend to have, as long as you treat them properly, with maybe some kind of controlled humidity. I would do a little bit of research ahead of time to figure out, radishes might need a bit of a higher humidity versus onions. You don't want to give onions a lot of humidity, they'll rot. But onions, garlic, potatoes are really low maintenance, but they're highly rewarding. Turnips can be a lot of fun. They're very tasty. Radishes, things like that. Tend to store really well.
Yeah, I love them. I've got actually all of those things kind of growing out in the garden right now. So it's, I can definitely attest to that.
And it's nice. The turnips and the radishes both also have edible tops. So you can use parts of the plant, cook them down, and you've got something for you just when you first pick it, and you have something, maybe a little later down the line.
Yeah. So this reminds me, you asked me, I think kind of what my favorite, maybe one favorite plant or vegetable is. What's yours? I'm so interested.
If it's not the winter squash / pumpkin, I couldn't narrow it down to a specific variety. I would have to say flint corn, or like more of like a harder ornamental corn, people call them, but you can still use it, you can still eat it. I like it because it has that long shelf life, and there is just such rich historical significance behind a lot of the varieties that we see today. They're kind of falling out of fashion. People used to depend on them pretty much solely until sweet corn really came around. But finding a really old heirloom variety of flint corn or dent corn, whatever you want to pick, can be really interesting to learn and, kind of trace the history of that. And then grow it in your garden. You have a little piece of history in your personal garden, which is a lot of fun. And some of the colors that you can get on that corn is incredible. I did glass gem corn last year, which I think is one that a lot of people associate with the flint corn. This year I'm growing it's called Bloody Butcher, which you can kind of visualize what it's like, this rich, vibrant red that you can just, hang up in your house or preserve for next year, use as seed, or you can process it and make, cornmeal or corn flour if you're one of the industrious types, I guess.
You bring up a really good point, and there's so many varieties, right? And we've had a lot of fun growing those, and like you said, we've got some that we grew 2 years ago that still, they're hard and storing very well. So the glass gem,
when you first open up that husk and it's like all those colors, it's nothing like it. I will say, for people, if they are getting a little ambitious and want to grow multiple varieties of corn, you have to remember that they are wind pollinated, which means you have to stagger the crops of corn. Either you have to separate them for a really long distance, so you don't get cross pollination and your corn kernels don't look a little strange, or you can stagger your plantings by, I think it's like 2 to 3 weeks, and they should flower and be done with flowering by the time the next one flowers. So you can really preserve that those nice heirloom genetics that a lot of people look for.
Wow. I love that. That's some
Mhm.
really great wisdom, because that was one of the first mistakes that we did when we were growing
Yeah.
an heirloom type of corn, is that we did not stagger, or we did
Mhm.
not take into account, we didn't have enough to pollinate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, make big difference.
Mhm.
Wait so long, you're like, oh, it's here, and then it's
Yeah.
not here at
You
all.
open it up and there's just a couple of kernels or yeah. Yeah.
Not here at all.
Yeah. But I mean, isn't that just what it's all about, is, growing something, it doesn't work out and you learn a little bit more for next year.
Absolutely, and I think that brings a kind of a concept that I mentioned in my book, is really just kind of working through disappointments. And it's almost like gardening teaches you a reframing of the way we view disappointments. Disappointments are not just, that. They're more so opportunities to learn, opportunities to understand ourselves and our environment. So I have gone through these quote unquote disappointments every season, but the way I react to them is completely different than when I first began. It's just kind of like, so that's what we need, or
Yes.
this is
Yes.
how it goes. And
Yeah,
it's
very
beautiful.
true.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it is just, the plant expressing a need, or maybe your environment expressing a need, and it's trying to communicate, and you just have to, I guess, learn to listen a little bit better, or interpret the
Huh.
signs a little bit differently,
Mhm.
and it can be really surprising
Yeah.
how much you can learn just from that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good advice, for sure. Awesome. Well, as we're maybe coming a bit closer to close, is there any more sage advice, apart from what you've already given us, about starting your own garden? Maybe somebody has a small space and they're really unsure where to start, or how to, approach a small scale garden.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about this in greater detail in the upcoming open house, which is happening next week. So excited. And I'm going to really cover a lot of tips around, how do I begin to even plan and visualize my space being transformed into this green, whatever, edible garden, flower garden, whatever it is that you desire to create, or to cultivate, I will say that. And I'm so excited about this because before we got on our call, I was telling you about how planning is so key to, starting each season. And that was the same way when I started our garden. And that planning looked like really evaluating, what do I actually have here? What do I have access to? Of course, there are the basics, which is water, light, and space. But then really thinking about your own feasibility, thinking about your own capacity. What do I have the capacity to do? And then, of course, imagine. You've got to visualize yourself actually being a gardener. If you can't see yourself being a gardener, how are you going to cultivate the space that you want? Yeah. And so there's a lot of planning that goes, that starts with us, really looking at the resources that we want to put into building the space. And then you can kind of look at, once you establish what you have, now what can I grow? If you do not have a lot of vertical space, then perhaps, maybe looking for more bush varieties of tomatoes, and things that aren't climbing so high. Maybe limit yourself to something that is, more compact for your space. If you're working with a balcony with partial shade, look for herbs and things that don't require full sun, perhaps. But at the same time, I will say, be encouraged, because there are thousands and thousands of varieties of vegetables and fruits and herbs, and really just plants for you to explore. So where, one thing might not work, research and figure out. Google is great. social media is great. If you are here in the United States, your local agricultural extension sites are great to kind of explore and to figure out exactly what you want. So I guess to bullet point that, you're working yourself, visualize what it is that you want, explore what resources you have, and then imagine how you want this, space to look like, and do some research on what you can grow.
Yes, that is great advice. Yeah, I think everybody can take some of that advice, in their own lives, and whether you have a garden already or you're just looking to establish it. I will say, for us plant people, for us gardeners, the wintertime can often be a bit slow, and you're just anticipating that that new growing season. So use that wintertime to prepare, map out your garden, just get really excited about the next growing season. Do that crucial planning, order those seeds, so that you're good and prepped for the oncoming growing season. And of course, don't get, like you said, don't get it too ahead of yourselves. I find that May comes along and I have 16 packets of seeds that I probably realistically can't plant, but it's better to be over prepared than under prepared.
I agree with you. And, sharing is caring. Honestly, this happens to me every year and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how did I end up with so much? But it's, that gives you an opportunity to share with others. And I will say, for anyone out there who, you've never gardened, or perhaps you have gardened and you really just want, some tips on how to grow even more. I definitely recommend, I'm going to do a shameless plug of my book, How to Become a Gardener, Find Empowerment in Creating Your Own Food Security, which really brings kind of this empowering guide back to the individual. You'll walk with me through my garden. I'm not talking at you and through the book. I'm more so talking with you. We're conversing together and walking through my garden and a few other gardens, really just talking about, the types of things that you can grow, but really how to start to do that internal work to make you a better gardener, a more mindful gardener. And also one that is going to produce and allow the garden to grow them as they are cultivating their own green space. So How to Become a Gardener is the title of my book.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yes, everybody definitely go check out that book. And if you are local to the Virginia and or Monticello area, you can hear Ashlie talk at our open house on May 27th. We'll have a couple of other speakers and some tours there as well. So I highly recommend that. But other than that, Ashlie, I really appreciate your time. And I think I don't think we have any audience questions.
No, I have a quick question. Can I ask a question? I popped back in to ask a question. So Ashlie, what do you do with everything that you grow? I'm assuming you eat, you provide most of the fruits and vegetables and herbs and stuff that you would eat, but what else do you do with the produce?
Besides, eating it, we actually share it. I am showing people how to grow some of the things that are, common foods that we eat that we purchase if you have access to it in the grocery stores, but also a lot of the uncommon things, really to show the diversity of foods and to get us back in touch with what is real, what tastes good, and what is good for our bodies. But it's to help us to fall in love with food in all of its richness. Yeah. So I'm processing it. I'm canning it inside of our she shed. I do a lot of preserving. I do a lot of giving it away to family, my grandparents who are on fixed income. So they appreciate being able to get fresh produce and things that are pretty pricey in the supermarkets. And yeah, we're eating everything that comes from our garden all throughout the year.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And Anna, did you want to talk a little bit about what you do with the vegetables that you grow at Tufton?
Sure. Yeah. Our primary goal is to supply Monticello's Farm to Table Cafe with produce. So we supplement. Obviously, we can't grow everything that they use over there, but will supplement a lot of their greens, a lot of their tomatoes, cucumber, whatever they have on the menu for that week. There's a chance that we grew it here. We also grow, I mentioned that one of our primary crops are tomatoes, and peppers. We package a lot of those, and that goes off to be made into, we have hot sauce, pepper jelly, and Bloody Mary mix, which is sold at the Monticello Visitor Center, that you can snatch up. It's quite tasty, I will say. And also with whatever excess we have, any small crop that I grew just for fun, we'll just give it off to the staff and, offer it up. We also have a donation location that we send to distribute produce to some of our local communities. That really ramps up in the summertime when we have more tomatoes than we know what to do with. So everybody loves a good fresh tomato. So we'll donate it there.
Yeah, I've been the beneficiary of some of the delicious produce. So
Awesome.
I can attest to the greatness of it. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Ashlie. Thank you, Anna. This was a fascinating conversation. And yeah, if you're in Virginia, come out to the open house on the 27th. You get to see Ashlie speak. Anna will be speaking, buy some plants. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you both again. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining our Monticello live stream. And we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.